Okay, we'll make a start, and I'll make a start by saying good afternoon. So good afternoon, friends and colleagues. It's really great to see so many of you here again for another talk in our Gen AI seminar series. And today's speaker is Professor Nicola Whitton. So Nicola is Professor of Digital Learning and Play in the School of Computer Science at Northumbria University, where interestingly, she is also the Dean of AI in Education, has been for 1 month now, I believe. She is internationally recognized for her research in the use of video and computer games and digital play to enhance learning. And in today's talk, she is going to discuss the potential of generative AI to disrupt established practices in higher education and to promote a fundamental rethinking of learning, teaching, and assessment. And that's a point clearly that's going to be informed and framed by her work on games and play. Okay, so in terms of format, we are going to go for something like 40 to 45 minutes of a presentation, but we were just talking beforehand. Nicola may stop every now and then and see if we've gathered any questions or if there's any bit of pushback maybe at particular points. And then there'll be a bit of time left over for kind of a discussion section. As usual, those of you not attending live and only watching the recording will only get that initial bit, that initial portion. So colleagues, you can post questions to the Q&A area in Zoom. The chat area is also open. And as before, you can upvote the questions of others if you'd like to see them get asked at the end or at some point throughout the talk. So I know you're very busy, Nicola, and in very high demand. So thanks very much for accepting our invitation to do this talk for us. And I think that's it. So over to you, really. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. What a lovely introduction. I'm really, really delighted to be asked. Can you hear me all right? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Fantastic. Okay, great. I'm obviously in my office to school computing, which means that the tech often doesn't work, ironically enough. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. I've been at Northumbria University for 2 years, having recently moved back to being a computer scientist after quite a long time away working in education and working in institutional leadership. And then in the summer, I saw this advertisement for a new role of Dean of AI in Education. And having sworn that I'd never go anywhere near leadership again, it was just too juicy and too exciting not to want to do. But I am only a month in role. And part of it has, part of the reason I loved it, I was so delighted to do this talk, is it's given me the opportunity to kind of think through, what do I think about this? What is the messages that I want to give to people? Because there's a lot of hype about Gen AI. There's a lot of, it's going to change the world, it's going to do this. And I kind of thought, well, actually in this role, I've got to have a view. I should say that what I'm going to talk about today is my view. It's not endorsed by Northumbria University. So I'm not an AI specialist. My research is in video games, but I have been involved in digital innovation and learning technology for over 25 years. So I kind of speak from that sort of space. This is my first talk on AI. This is kind of a brand new set of ideas. And it was really an opportunity to kind of just put some of my thoughts together. I will say some might be ill-formed, some are embryonic, and some I might have changed my mind by the time I finished talking about it. But I did also kind of want this to be an opportunity to get a feeling from other people of, does this resonate? Does this sound crazy? And to get your ideas and your discussion as I kind of frame this dialogue and this discourse. Some of it's high-level thought experiments. Some of it I get will be completely impractical. A lot of what I keep coming back to is, but we don't do it like that, or it's impractical, or the university system doesn't work like that. And I've sort of come to the conclusion a bit like, maybe we just need to change those assumptions or change what university is and what it does. I've also, you might have noticed, you used AI to generate my pictures because I do like playing around with AI and what it thinks. So this is, I asked it to do me a first slide that encompasses objects that are associated with playful learning, and I'm not entirely sure where the goat comes from, but let's just live with the goat. So to kind of move on. So assume it's moving on. Excellent. So Teenage Fan Club, Everything Flows. Now, I have to admit the Teenage Fan Club references in here because it's my husband's favourite band and he was really chuffed that I could put a Teenage Fan Club reference in. But the reason it's here is this is kind of coming back to this idea of everything flows. And again, as I said, I've been around learning technology for a long time. And with the kind of AI hype, there was a little bit of me going, well, do you know what? We've seen this before. We saw this when the internet came in. We saw it when Web 2 came in. And it comes back, before that, we were talking about the printing press and the calculator, and none of these things really provide that kind of step change that we're talking about AI doing. I mean, I remember when the internet came in and Google and Wikipedia was going to change teaching and learning, and none of it really has. And then this comes to this idea of everything flows, which I didn't realize, but I went and looked up and also had to look up to how to pronounce. It's Heraclitus, who was a Greek philosopher from around 500 BC. And this idea of everything flows is basically that everything's always changing. And this is, I think, really important to remember when we start to talk about AI. It's not like we've had the same sort of education, suddenly AI, and it's all different and all better and whatever. This is part of a constant flow and change in the political system. So obviously there are people in the political system who will want to jump on the AI bandwagon, who will want to think about, well, what can we do better and what can we change, and not in a way that's financially motivated, not necessarily about better teaching and learning. Equally, technology is constantly changing. And something new comes out every so often, and sometimes it sticks. I mean, the number of times I've seen that video games are going to be the new way of teaching every 10 years or so, it never kind of sticks. I mean, I think generative AI is going to stick, but while technology is changing, teaching, learning, and assessment practice really isn't changing. We get some movements, we get pieces of change, but actually, in higher education, there is some, but essentially a lot of universities, not traditional universities, are still teaching the same way that they taught 400 years ago. Certainly in the UK in schools, I've got a daughter who's about to do her GCSEs, she's 16, first set of exams. And it almost seems to have gone retrogressively to back in my day, you had to memorize things and regurgitate them in however you saw fit. Now you literally have to memorize the language that they have. If they don't use the right words in the right order, they don't get marks. And it's almost like, well, okay, so we've got people who are taught that the dominant model is memorization, regurgitation. Of course, AI is going to do that. And for me, it's about maybe AI will be the thing that finally makes us change, not how our brains work and not how we necessarily learn things, but the systems that propagate certain ways of learning and teaching. I think COVID's had something to do with it. I think we're possibly more the fact that a lot of, particularly going back to assessment, that a lot of different types of assessment happened during COVID allows the kind of landscape for that happening. But we're almost at the point now. So I've had several people come to me and say, can I go back? We don't use a lot of exams at Northumbria, but a lot of people are kind of, we need to go back. We need to get all our exams back online. And it's almost like, well, no, we're not going back to that place. We actually have an opportunity here for doing something that's different, but we've got to start to question every single assumption that we've got. So the next slide is kind of my thinking through. This is what AI thought perfect AI assessment should be. And to be honest, having lots of extra hands and that weird claw thing would be quite useful. But this is my attempt to kind of think through as technology changes, as the needs of society change, as the needs of students change, it's becoming less fit for purpose and it's becoming more obvious that it's fit for purpose. This kind of model of knowledge reproduction and evidencing the knowledge reproduction is outdated. Students hate it and staff hate marking it. It's, I don't know if it's like that with you, but when it comes to marking season, everybody hates it. So it's not working, and it's also kind of thinking, well, what's assessment for? Is it for learning, which is kind of a thing, but or is it for just is it really important that we put people in bands and we know what type of degree people have? Is that still a sort of idea that's useful? Alongside that, for that, I genuinely believe you can't test for AI. I know we have systems that purport to do it. I don't know if you have Turnitin. Turnitin has an AI tester, but AI gets better and the AI tester gets better, and it's you can't really tell. It's not practical. It's not ethical. You can spend an awful lot of resources and stress trying. I've never seen that. It's certainly here as its own evidence stand up in a academic misconduct tribunal. And certainly over the last 2 years, people in certain disciplines more than others have just been spending so much time trying to prove that people have committed academic misconduct. When actually, I think that the source of the matter is the types of assessments that we're giving people. And kind of, well, if AI, generative AI, can answer an essay question as well as a person, well, maybe we're asking the wrong questions. And is that what we should be doing? If as a society we're kind of moving on to the point where we don't have to do things, we wouldn't be calculating logarithms by hand anymore because we have calculators. So do we want to be doing things by hand when we have tools that will do it for us? As I said before, we can't go back to in-person exams. I think there's lots of reasons, but around, at least not entirely in-person exams, they're stressful, they're not ethical, they don't, not a genuine test of anything really, other than the ability to work for an exam and then sit an exam. And if AI can pass an assessment, are we assessing the right things? So then goes back to, what's assessment for? Are we measuring stuff? Is it about learning? Is it about evidencing stuff? And do our assessments test real world skills? And then you get into this, is AI cheating? And that's why I kind of went down this bit of a rabbit hole, because I did a talk last year about, I got to do a keynote at Playful Learning, which is my baby conference, and I got invited back to do a keynote. And that was lovely because I could just talk about exactly whatever I wanted. And I decided I was going to talk about cryptic crosswords because they're my personal passion. They're not something I really talk about, but I love doing them. I love setting them. I'm a bit of a crossword geek. And incidentally, trying to get GenAI to either solve or write cryptic crosswords, it's hilarious and it's nowhere near there yet. But there is a whole thing in the cryptic crossword community about cheating. And cheating involves whether you use a crossword solver when you get stuck. Now, certainly when I was learning, I would have got stuck. I've always used a solver. My kind of thing is I do this, it's for fun, I enjoy it, and I don't enjoy getting stuck. I won't go first to a crossword solver, but if I get stuck, I'll do it, or I'll look up on the internet, or I'll ask for some help, because that's not cheating. That's just me getting over my hurdle and learning from doing it to doing it. I mean, I don't enter crossword competitions, but to be honest, I wouldn't have thought that was a huge problem anyway, because it's about using the tools at your disposal to learn to go forward. Whereas there are other people in the crossword community who will just be like, no, it's got to come out your brain, and you've got to know all these things. And given that the whole community is actually a bit elitist and requires a certain amount of esoteric and middle class knowledge, so I was like, well, you're absolutely drawing up the gatepost there. And I thought, well, is this where we are with AI as well? Is using AI cheating? And I guess in some cases it might be if we explicitly say that people can't use it. But well, what if we said, actually, people can use AI? Do we need to go down this rabbit hole of testing and testing whether AI has been used? If you imagine a world where, yeah, we give equal access to high quality LLMs for students, and we just say you use it as appropriate, because that's how you're going to use it in the real world. Now, obviously, in practice, there'll be some cases where it's not appropriate, and there'll be things like public sector, if you've got external regulations, that's not going to work. So I was kind of thinking, well, is that a model? Is that the Wild West? Is that nuts? Because it saves a lot of thinking in terms of we don't have to regulate it, but also, is it fair on our students? And that's when I thought, actually, I think this is a really important distinction, and I don't think we make it enough, is that there's a huge difference between using AI for learning and AI for doing. And this is the difference between the novice and the expert. And often so I can use AI to do things that I know I can do them myself, but AI makes them quicker. But if I didn't know what I was doing, AI would not do them as well. But because I know what I'm doing, it's almost like a superpower. But it wouldn't, if I was a novice, help me to do that. I wouldn't know of the bits that needed to be changed or the bits that didn't, or the next prompt to ask, or how to improve it, or what to check, or what the links were that were already in my head. So I think we've really got to do this. We've got to distinguish between AI for doing and AI for learning. And AI for doing is always going to be average unless you're an expert, because it's an aggregate, it's an average of everything. So it's going to be average. And if we have a whole class where students just do the AI for doing, everything's going to be average, which is probably better than well, no, actually, if you take the average, everything will always be average. But if you think about students at the moment, and if students go, right, I'm going to let AI do everything, which actually I don't think most students want to do. But I have heard people say this, students won't learn anything because they're just going to get AI to do everything. If they do that, the bar is then going to have to go up, because those that are taking the time to use it to learn will make this movement from novice to expert. Once you're an expert, that's that sort of extra bit. So there's a whole talk about AI making us efficient. And I think we need to get away from that language. AI for learning shouldn't be efficient. It shouldn't be about creating this brilliant product, and it shouldn't be fast. The good thing is it's about process. It's about being slow and interrogating it and using it to learn. And it's about being effective and not being efficient. And I think making that distinction is really important. I think it's important how we talk to our students. I think it's important about the kind of skills that we're teaching. And actually, I don't think that AI will make you any better than average until you become an expert. But AI can also help you in that process to becoming an expert. So again, I said my background is in play and video games and higher education. So that's one to get me thinking, right, okay, we've got this transition. AI is changing things. It's out the box. I don't know there's very much we can do to it. We can't go back to exams. Equally, there is this distinction between novice and expert in learning and doing. And my background is in games and games and learning. And a thing that I use a lot for sort of as a thought experiment is this model, which is called the magic circle. This is sort of in its latest incarnation. I put the reference on there if anybody wants to kind of go back to it. And what this does is it takes the theorization of games and playfulness as separate things. The idea being that games are the objective activity that have various affordances. And the playfulness is the state of mind when one decides that they want to move into play and accept the rules of the game of play, but it's when you have a game and you play it and you engage in it playfully, you kind of hit this sweet spot of play. So this sort of metaphor that I use is the magic circle. And this came from game anthropology and Huizinga in about, I think it's 1950s. He doesn't really define, he just talks about it as a sort of liminal space outside of the real world, where the different rules of the world apply. Game theorists Salen and Zimmerman then pick it up in the early noughties, and they talk about it very much applying to video game spaces, and it's the boundaries of the way that people in and around the game spaces act differently, and that these are not necessarily physical boundaries, they are just different spaces. And I was really interested in this idea from a kind of learning perspective of, well, if we have this magic circle, what's it look like to be in the magic circle and what are the affordances of it? And that's when I started mapping it onto games and play and playfulness. And I kind of the model that I'm now sort of picked up on that and said, well, actually, so there are things that we know about from video games and from games in general that are affordances for pedagogy and learning. The two kind of key ones being this idea of meaningful activity. So that's having learning that's active, situated, constructivist, problem-based, meaningful, that actually is sort of an appropriate challenge, and that people feel that they can achieve the challenge, but it's not too easy, and because if it's too easy, it'd be boring, and it's not too difficult, because if it's too difficult, it'd be frustrating. Aside that is this idea of intrinsic motivation. So games evolved purely for play. That's the primary purpose for but I mean, there are serious games, there are applied games, but in terms of the evolution of humanity, games were there for their value of people do it because they want to do it. So actually having that intrinsic motivation is really important. Now, again, if you compare this to, how many of us are intrinsically motivated to study, particularly looking at sort of A levels and the way that things help us, that the structures kind of suck all that intrinsic motivation and fun out of things that people might be intrinsically motivated to study, in a way that games kind of put that back. So again, it's looking at being driven by curiosity, about having mechanics in there that kind of keep people engaged, that help them around scaffolding, around getting stuck, moving forward. That we kind of lost from higher education, really. On the flip side of that, around playfulness, so two key affordances. Again, one is this idea of a ludic community. So Bernard Suits, who's written this amazing book called The Grasshopper, that I would say if you could read one book about play, it should be this. The Grasshopper, he's a play philosopher, and his whole book is a series of sort of Socratic dialogues about what is play, what is games. And he has this idea of a illusory attitude, which is a willingness to embrace the spirit of play, and kind of go forward with that, and just accept the rules of the other players and the alternative environment. There's a beautiful concept from Bernie de Coven where he talks about when people are playing, they have a state of co-liberation. So it's like liberated collaboration, but it's by agreeing to play, they're agreeing to keep the game going, even if they're competing, because of the enjoyment of playing the game. So it's about working together, being collaborative, having empathy, sort of getting the state of belonging. Coupled with that is this idea of imaginative freedom. So when you're playing, you can go into a space that you can be anyone, you can do anything, you can have any sort of new set of rules. There's no limits on that. So it's the kind of discovery of possibilities, other worlds, other ways of being. But the key one for me is that when you've got all this good stuff from playfulness, you've got all the good stuff from games, and you can have one without the other, and it's all in the magic circle. But it's this idea of failure mindset. So games are designed for people to fail. If you can't fail in a game, they kind of lose the point. Equally, playfulness is designed to support failure. Because you're in the space with the people and it provides a safe space of safety, failure matters less. And going back to what I think the real problem with education is that we don't let students fail. We don't teach them that failure is inevitable. We don't teach them how to fail gracefully. We don't teach them how to fail productively. And maybe there's actually something in thinking about this from the sort of perspective of AI that could help us think about, well, what can AI do in terms of this magic circle? Now, I can see there are some chats coming forward. Can I ask it? I haven't had a chance to kind of read them in detail, but can I just ask whether there's anything that is a good question to pick up right now?
Yeah, well, I can just give you a super quick summary there, maybe, if that's
Great,
okay. Basically, going back to your comments about your daughter's experience of education, one of our staff says that our system, unfortunately, is also about specific language and memorizing. I was on to say, yes, we've turned it in as a way to, I suppose I was gesturing or indicating a familiarity there with the false impression that the vendor has given that we have this ability to identify AI-generated content. And then Jeremiah, in the same vein, says something more complicated here, saying we're never going to have reliable methods for detecting AI-generated content because as the models evolve and their outputs become more human-like, every attempt at detection is going to be rendered ultimately obsolete. So rather than, and as very much to your own point, Nicola, rather than chasing technological fixes, we should focus instead on cultivating transparency, trust, and ethical use. And you're about to add playfulness, I suspect. I had added AI for doing. So you were making this very useful distinction between AI for doing and AI for learning. And I was saying that the AI for doing bit reminded me of that idea of finding hybrid ways for humans and AI to work together, where the AI is a collaborator that kind of augments our analysis or our judgment or our maybe even our creativity. But ultimately, it's the human being who has the final responsibility the ethical discernment and all of that. And all of that stuff. But
Yeah.
I think it's a very useful distinction. It allows us to think in different ways about how to deploy AI and to build AI-based solutions and services, I suppose, depending on whether it's AI for the experts, that's AI for doing, or AI for learning, which, as I understand it, is AI for the novices and those on their way to becoming experts. So, yeah, I think that's a summary of what's been said so far.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you for the feedback, everyone. And and I think it's getting this across is that we can't get away from the practice and the repetition needed to learn something. I mean, the 10,000 hours idea that you've got to do this, that's debunked. But the general idea that you've got to do all the hard stuff to make yourself good at it, but then once you're good at it, you don't necessarily have to keep doing it, I think is one that we just kind of gloss over. So I started to think about, well, that's play and that's learning in a magic circle. So again, what might assessment in a magic circle in an age of AI look like? So this is, I love that AI has only got, this is done on ChatGPT, and it only says about 3 models of what a person looks like. I didn't ask for a room full of twins, but they seem to think that that's what was needed. Because that's an assessment. We love it, but it's still exams, but without pens. We may be writing with our fingers or something here. But what would it like that look like then? So I just started doing a bit of a thought experiment to go, well, okay, so if you're thinking about the meaningful activity, what's meaningful assessment? So, well, actually, it's something that's interestingly challenging, personally relevant, achievable, and actually AI to generate, to modify, to personalize assessment, to start that conversation about, well, why are we all doing the same thing? Because apart from anything else, doing the same thing is really boring to mark. So are there ways of thinking about how we can use AI to make things real world, to make them relevant? And then again, can come back to intrinsic motivation. And students hate being assessed and we hate marking it. But actually, so change that paradigm, or rather than thinking of it as a necessary evil, can we create assessments that teachers want to mark? So part of the reason that things are hard to mark is because often they're quite low level. Well, now if we say that as part of this journey from novice to expert is about what comes in at the expert level being better, can be potentially more interesting, more creative, bringing together ideas beyond text. I mean, AI does have a certain sort of funny, silly, whimsiness, sort of immaturity, particularly if you start using it for images. It can, I think, sort of add something else. I mean, again, opportunities for failure I find particularly great because you've got all the sort of, okay, you can do a lot of formative assessment with AI. Now, I come down very hard line on we should not be marking with AI. Because we get into a state there where students create stuff in AI, we mark them in AI, we might as well none of us be here. But actually, for formative assessment, it's really good. But recognizing that AI is flawed, it's opportunities for practice and feedback and interrogation, and potentially by putting playful constraints onto things that would, again, the idea of playfulness and constraints making things more creative. But actually, you've got a failed thing. AI fails all the time. It makes up references. It's biased. It cannot create or solve a cryptic crossword clue. It's got these little pockets of things it can't do. And it's really chill about it. It just goes, yeah, I made a mistake. And then it'll make the same mistake again. I love it. You ask it for a 5-letter word beginning with P, and it will go, here's a 5-letter word, pig. And you'll be like, no, that begins with P, but it's only got 3 letters. And they'll be like, oh, right, you want the 5-letter word beginning with P? Cheese. You're like, what? How can you? And then it manages to fail graciously. It's a really good role model for doing that. We have Claude at Northumbria, and that's got some really exciting tools in terms of sharing of projects. But thinking about how we can use AI collaboratively, how we can use it supportively, how we can use it in peer review, how we can use it as a thinking partner, and kind of how we can use peer feedback. I saw a really interesting article, it was today or yesterday, which was about looking at, I mean, it was quite a small scale study, but it was like looking about the feedback that came from peers and that came from AI and that came from teachers and which ones were most valued by students. And it wasn't the ones by teachers, although I think that they did say the teachers' ones were better. So it's kind of we have lots of options, but it is this critical literacy of knowing that yeah, you might get feedback from AI, and some of it will be good, and some of it will be rubbish, and you've almost got to have that kind of conversation, that interrogation of it. I think, again, thinking about it creatively, you've got multimedia, you've got multimodal ways of learning, you've got playing with it. I think our worry is that students will get AI to write them essays. And I genuinely, I don't think many students, that's what they really want to do. But I think getting them to do crazy things with it, getting it, the idea of it being able to mash up concepts, to riff off ideas, there's a lot in there, and it's much more fun and interesting to kind of engage with. It's hard. I think it comes back to this kind of fear of failure. I think particularly from students don't like assessment for two reasons, I reckon. One is because it's boring most of the time, and it's sort of, they don't, what's the point of this? And the other one is because they're really terrified of not doing well in it. I mean, particularly a university like ours, we have a high proportion of local, from non-traditional students, first in family students, and this is the biggest feedback we're getting from students using AI, is that they're too scared to use it because they're worried about being caught cheating, whatever cheating might look like, and that they're afraid of failing in assessments. So it's like, well, how can we use AI to reduce that fear of failure? Recognizing that the people that propagate traditional assessment and want to go back to exams are those that were privileged and have benefited for it. And that actually this starts to become a political argument about horrible assessment's not a rite of passage. You don't have to do it. It's just how we used to do it back in the day. And actually, can we get AI to help us think really creatively and completely off the wall about, well, what might assessment look like in a different world? So then I went back to some thinking that I did a while ago. This was around a game-based assessment, thinking about the types of failure that we have, looking at the level of consequence of failure and the level of feedback. Now, one thing that struck me is that AI is very, very good at giving feedback, often a bit patronizing and a bit too much. But it's almost like, I like to think of it, if rather than thinking about it as like a tutor who knows everything, you reframe it as kind of your drunk mate in the pub who thinks they know about everything but gets it wrong quite a lot, but is still entertaining. It then becomes a very different type of conversation to have. So again, looking at the kind of the things on this model, you've got your high consequence, your low feedback. So something like our A-level and GCSE exams here, you get one shot. It really matters if you fail it, and all you ever get is a grade. You've no idea why you failed it or kind of what's going on there. Ditto on the kind of high consequences, what I call a serious fail. There's a high lot of feedback, but it still matters. So something like a driving test. You know why you failed, you know when you failed, you know immediately that you failed, but you've still failed, and it's still a big deal. Equally, on the kind of low consequence, you've got this kind of low consequence, low feedback. So something like you misspell potatoes on the shopping list. You put an extra E or you miss out an E. I can never remember which one it is. Doesn't matter. And you maybe never even find out about it. But the bit that I think is really interesting, the kind of sweet spot, is this microfail. So high feedback, low consequence. And how can we get people to do it? And at the time I was writing about this, I was thinking about video games. And then when I was thinking about it in AI is really good at all these microfails. It can give you examples. It can act as a tutor. It can give you practice. It's really good for this kind of playful dialogue. And actually, can we think about assessment not necessarily being this one shot, end of the year, got to be done in a certain way, but as an opportunity for lots and lots of microfails? And that's when I went back to another presentation and went, well, okay, I did some thinking along a while ago about what if we challenge some of the assumptions that are about why and how universities have to assess, and what might that look like? And can we bring in some of the things about, because while we have assessments that just work in the way that they work, we might end up finding it very difficult to make AI work in that kind of space, which is not a fault of AI. It's not a fault of students, not a fault of people who are writing the assessments. It's almost a fault of the constraints of the system, and maybe we need to start to play around with those a little bit. So then, I kind of went back to these thought experiments before, and it was like, okay, so what if we didn't have assessments? And these are very much, I would say, sort of thought experiments, straw men, straw people, that I'm interested in sort of thinking, well, could it spark something? I do get they're not massively practical, but it's almost like, can we start this conversation about what, how, what might or could be different? So level up assessment. So we don't have an assessment at the end of a semester. We have a series of bite-sized assessments that get gradually harder. They can all be repeated. It's not about you do it and you get it wrong. It's about you do it and you try it again. You do it and you get feedback. You do it and, and thinking back to the difference between the learning and the assessment, AI is really good for this as a learning process. What are the levels? But it's about how do we make them fun? How do we make them engaging? How do people want to do them? So the assessment isn't, because when you think about it, if I'm doing a level in a video game, technically that's an assessment, but nobody calls it an assessment because the fear of failure is not there and it's fun. So how can we use AI to get rid of those two things and start to reframe what assessment's about? So in my favourite game, if nobody's ever played this, this is from The Secret of Monkey Island. It came out in 1990, which again shows my age, and it was a complete game changer in that before the Monkey Island, adventure games were, well, they were textual, but even if you got some pictures, you would play them for a bit, and if you died or you met a warg or you met a troll or whatever you did, you'd go back to start the game, and then you could have taken like 20 minutes or half an hour to get there. There's no like, I mean, you could save, but saving back in the days of the Spectrum was just not even worth thinking about. And you went back, and it was like this. It's essentially a big consequence. Yeah, you might have known why it happened, but then you had to play, and it was quite slow. And then somebody would want to use the telly to watch the news or whatever. But what this type of game did is it moved from these serious fails into these microfails. So it's pretty much, there's two ways you can die in this game, and both of them are completely nuts, and you have to actually find them. But it moved to that. So can we kind of get a Monkey Island version of assessment universities? So there's different ways of doing things. But if you don't do it right, that's not the end of the game. You just try again. So it's almost like solving different problems in a variety of different routes until you get to the end. And I hate this idea about assessment. Everything has to be done at the same time, and I know the logistics of how universities work. But imagine everybody was just doing it in their own time, in their own pace, and they would sit the assessment when they felt ready to sit the assessment. If they didn't do it then, they'd do it again the next time. But because we have a system that isn't just about assessing people, it's about grading people. Then you're a first and you're a 2-1. Even though nowadays almost everybody gets a first or 2-1, and it's a fairly pointless system. But actually, what it's about, you're competent to do this thing. And that's what employers want. So I think it's just thinking about what are there ways of using AI to kind of remove that failure, and about trying different approaches and thinking differently and thinking creatively. Then there's this one. This is my favorite one. I'd love to do this, and I'd never be allowed. But what if you didn't know how you were going to be assessed? Because that's basically the real world, isn't it? You just don't know. And then challenges pop up, and then you deal with them. So you're going to be assessed. You know what you need to learn. You know what you need to do. But you don't know what the assessment's going to be. And it's one day, you might not even know it's happened until after it's happened. I know no university would ever let me do this. But imagine it's collaborative. It's about thinking about different ways of doing it, different ways of being assessed, having to use your evidence, AI will be really good for providing different ways of evidencing the same thing, because essentially what we've got is learning outcomes that we need to evidence. And we can be so much more creative in what's the way that we can evidence these. I think that more interesting. So this kind of stemmed from a long time ago. I used to work at Manchester Metropolitan University, and somebody had told me about an assessment they were doing in the art school, which was essentially they would have surprise projects. Now, I don't think they were actually marked on these, but because it was very much an in-person course, you would come in, everybody would have their own studio space, everybody was in all the time. And then I think it was twice a term, they'd come in and go, right, you've got a 24-hour project. You will get into groups, and somebody wants this commission, and you've just got to do it. And they were optional, but people did them because they were really cool, they were really fun, and everyone got really engaged with them. But actually, could we do something like that? I don't know, probably not. And my other favourite is this idea of inevitable failure assessment. Imagine you get an assessment you just can't pass. Now, again, my geeky husband did say that is a thing like this in Star Trek, which I'm sure any Trekkies out there, some sort of test that Captain Kirk did, but he did it by cheating. And I thought, well, yeah, I don't kind of understand what that's about. But this would be like, you can't pass. And maybe there's something to be learned from knowing that actually in real life, everybody's going to fail. And being able to fail in a way that it's not, you can do it progressively and you can do it well. And once you can fail comfortably and happily, it's so much easier to try new things, to step out your comfort zone, because you actually know failing, it doesn't really matter. So it's almost like the failing is inevitable. An example of this, like, again, different institution that I was lucky enough to get this module approved, and then I left the institution, was the students had to go out and do something that they knew they'd fail, and they were marked on their reflections on the failure. But again, AI, lots of opportunities for thinking about failing. It fails all the time. It hallucinates. It draws too many fingers on things. Can looking at how AI fails and letting AI fail teach us to fail? So time's almost up. So I'm going to kind of finish on, this is what AI thinks learning is going to be, and AI is going to be like in the future. And I love that there's space people and there's a mountain. And I don't know why some of the backpacks are blue, but no doubt it has some reason behind it. So is it the catalyst to change in learning, teaching, assessment? I really hope so, because I think there are things that are a little bit broken about our higher education system that we need to kind of rethink about. I think it's rethinking that paradigm and focusing on the process of learning rather than the product, and making this really clear distinction between this is AI for working and AI for learning, and AI for doing. And that there are some things that are really hard and boring and difficult that you just need to do. And one example that is a bit contentious here is we're taking an example could be that you can get AI to summarize a paper for you. And that's great, you can, but also you do at some point have to learn how to summarize a paper yourself. And once you can do it, by all means, get AI to summarize it for you. But I think we need to be really clear that you've got to be able to do the thing to be able to judge how well AI has done it. And you have to check AI's work. It is your drunk friend in a pub. It makes stuff up. It drools beer on stuff. And if you don't know how to do it, you can't check its work. But, it's the real world. We're always going to have to evidence achievement at universities. Like they're not going to get rid of the classification system anytime soon. There will be academic misconduct. I can't see that they're just going to go, that's not a thing. But the thing is that if somebody really wants to cheat, and by cheat, I mean plagiarize, pass off work that's not their own work, they'll do it anyway. They've done it before AI, they'll do it after AI. And we just need to think about, well, what's the kind of evidence, how we think about that. I think the bar to things will change. As students become experts, the outputs that they produce will become better, but also potentially more interesting and more fun to mark. And we just got to think about how we do that. I think being key to this is we've got to teach students how to use AI critically. We've got to make this distinction about when to use it, what to use it for, and to be able to know whether the stuff it produces is any good or not. Because if they don't do that, it's almost like, what are they actually learning? So we can't ban AI. I don't believe we can test for it. But actually, I think teaching our students how to use it playfully, how to use it well, and to make that distinction between learning and doing is really important. So that's me. Just perfect timing as well. And I'm really interested in your thoughts, comments, and questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Nicola. So look, we're going to stop the recording now, and just for the sake of the recording, and in case I don't get a chance later on, I'm just going to say thank you so much for your really engaging talk and for a really fresh perspective, which is so welcome on generative AI and learning. I think it's fair to say that your framing of generative AI through that lens of games and play and playfulness and the magic circle offers a really new, valuable and hopeful way to think about the challenges and opportunities of generative AI. Really like that AI for learning and AI for doing distinction. And look, I know you're really busy and in very high demand, so thanks so much for accepting our
Huge
invitation
pleasure.
to do this talk.